All right, so now that we've had snow once again in the middle of this weird weather, 70 degrees, cold, windy, snow. Tomorrow will probably be 80 and sunny. Um, so we looked at and we built the ability for it to create a verb phrase where we had the prepositional phrase as optional. And so again, this is not the only way to do that. This just happens to be one way we could create that. But using that same idea, we can modify to add a second independent clause. So we can change this a little bit. Um, so if we want to create an independent clause, we don't have that in our list right yet. So we don't call that. So the first thing we're going to do is we have to create this. So we're going to define a function. And so since we're calling it a dependent clause, maybe we just use that as the function name. And we're not taking in any arguments. So what this is going to do then, we've got the other pieces. So our clause, if we look here, and the girl played baseball. So really what we're calling then is we're going to just have this basically return at the end of it. And when it returns, what it's going to then force to happen is it's going to force a noun phrase to be built. And we're going to add that to a verb phrase. So in other words, it's going to build in another clause directly in there. So we can say what it is. Builds, what do we call these? Builds and returns a independent clause. Alright, so just telling it what we're doing. So now we need to go down and figure out where are we going to call this dependent clause. So until we actually call this function doesn't do us any good at all. So we created, so verb phrase comes down here. So we have to figure out where we are going to call this from. So maybe we're going to have to actually build in an additional piece to actually think about if we're going to create an entire sentence. So maybe we need another function, and you could do it without it. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but this is the way that my brain says, all right, we're gonna build a sentence. And so that sentence is going to have a couple of different pieces to that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have to say, all right, so click down, just so we say what we're doing. So builds a sentence with a randomly selected independent clause. Alright, so the very first thing we might need to do So, I think what I want to call this. So, let's call it beginning. Just a variable name I'm using there. And we're going to assign that what happens in our independent clause. So when we hit this function, it's going to go up and it's going to return this. So it's going to return a noun phrase and a verb phrase. Well, hang on. That's a spelling issue there. Okay. So it's going to come up and it's going to grab that independent clause. Now, whether we use it or not is going to be the next piece in here. So what we need to do is think about, I used something like this here, so we could certainly do something very similar. So I'm going to just copy this for now. Now I have to change a lot of pieces of it, but that same structure we could apply here. So sentence, builds and returns a, all right, chunk. So what I'm using this for is I have this section here that allows me to create a random opportunity. And so that random opportunity, so if this chance is 1, so we have a 10% chance right now, then I want to create, so I'm going to return my beginning plus, I'm going to add then random.choice of conjunctions, because we have to connect those two pieces together. And so I've got a list of conjunctions that we're going to have to build. So random choice out of conjunctions plus, then we're going to add that independent clause. So, if, let's see if I can make this a little bigger so we can see that whole line a little easier. So if our chance is equal to 1, so essentially randomly we should have a 1 out of 10 chance, this function is going to return a beginning, so we get our independent clause plus some way to add them, so a conjunction and or something. And then it's going to run that again. So it's going to create a sentence and something else. So if I look at my example, the boy took a drink and, so that's what we're creating here with that conjunction, the girl played baseball. So we add the second piece back in there. Otherwise, all we're going to do so choice 1 says, hey, we're going to get this random choice and we're going to add a second independent clause. Otherwise, we create a sentence just like we did before, because we're going to look at it that way. So the other piece we need to add in here is we need to think about what conjunctions we have so that we can pull those out. So I'm just going to say conjunctions is equal to, now I'm doing them as a tuple rather than a list because we're not going to change them. So and is one, but So we'll just leave it at those two for now. There's some other conjunctions we could use, but so now we have all these pieces put together. And one of the things I like to do, so it's a little harder to show here. Let's see if I can show it on this side. We open this up a little differently. Copy and paste. Let me show something very similar, but I want to pull it out of Notepad. And this is one of the things I like about Notepad that we haven't shown you yet that it does. So Notepad allows me to collapse these functions. So when I start creating how it's going to work, I just see these functions. I don't see all the details of them, so it makes it a lot shorter and easier to deal with. So notice over here, I can expand them, or I could say, hey, 24 to 34. So I can expand those, and then I can see how that works. So this allows me to create those functions, access them, and I can think in terms of, all right, so if we go here, so this is kind of a, we're just giving you this. This always starts our main function. We could say, all right, our main does this, and we call our function sentence. And we go up there and we run that. So this is one of the things I like about Notepad versus just doing it in the idle environment, is I can have these very easy to just abstractly look at those. Sometimes I will even put in, so if I want to keep track of what variables are going in there, I can do that. Requires X, Y, Z. And I can put them at the end of that with our hashtag or pound sign, and now I can have a note right there, and this makes it easier for me to kind of plan a much more complex program where we go back and we reuse pieces over and over and over again. Let's move that out of the way for now. So I like the Notepad++. And it allows me to build these much longer, so I'm not scrolling around, and I can collapse those and make life a little easier. So the book has a lot of details about this. What we're really trying to do is create a way that we're building these random sentences. Well, one of the things that we're doing with this, we get a lot of comments, interesting things about, and we see how people are using technology to try to circumvent our plagiarism tools. With the skills from this, you could build a substitution, so a word salad for an article. So in other words, you could go through and you would have a list of all what you said were verbs, and you could randomly change verbs out in a document to break an encryption or a plagiarism tool. So just something that you can actually do at this point. All right, so let's take a look really quickly at 5.1, because we haven't looked at it yet, and I threw that to the side to start with. So we're going to now go backwards, now that we've got some of these function pieces, hopefully, embedded in our brains. And functions are really easy. We define it, we can take information in, and we return something out. So what we would like to do is build a tool. So if you're taking stats courses, or yes, you can create them on your calculator, but wouldn't it be kind of neat to be able to create your own and figure out how we can do it? So we're going to create some of these functions on our own. So we're going to create median and mode and mean, median, mode. My 5th grader is working on this right now. Mean, median, and mode. So let's define them so we remember what they are. So what does mode mean? Does anybody remember? The most often. All right. Median is just like the median on the highway. It's the number in the middle. And then mean is simply an average. Okay. So we know that we're going to create some of these functions. So first thing, I'm just going to tidy this up, make sure my name's in there. That's very helpful when I pull these out in bulk and we start looking at them. So we're going to create some functions. So create functions mean, median, mode. So let's take a look a little further down. And each function should return 0 if the list is empty. Include a main function that tests 3 statistical functions. So it's going to show us our list, give us our mode, median, and mean. Okay. So here they're saying we're not pulling it off of a file, which might be a little easier. We're just creating a list. Could we have it where the users input their own numbers? Yeah. But let's start with this idea that we're going to create this list. Now, the reason they spell it with a Y instead of an I in here is list itself is a reserved keyword. So if I tried to create it, notice how it puts it as orange? That tells me that it's not a good variable name. So lyst, we'll do some functions that way. So we are putting those into a list so that we can actually maneuver things around. Well, the first reason we might want to do that is to find things like the middle of a list. What do we need to do to that list? We need to put it in order, right? So I've been fighting with my 10-year-old because she's like, I just look at this, I don't need to recreate this list and reorder it. Yeah, you do. So I'm going to put in the same numbers that we have here, 1, 7, 1, 4, 10. So we can put in any values, and in fact, we will change some of those values to try and see what else we can do. All right, so we know that we have to do some of this, so that we're going to have a couple of different functions in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat a little bit. And I'm going to use my constructor, or the way that we always start our program. So this is just a given. We're going to use an if statement. If I can type. So really what this says, this is always going to evaluate true. So does main equal main? So, or the name equals main? Yep, we know it's going to be in there as a function. And so we're going to run main. That's really all it does. So it searches the program, says, hey, yep, main's there, we're going to run it. So the very first thing we're going to need then is we're going to need to create a function for main. So we know we're going to have to create several functions. So we're going to need to create a mode, median, and mean. So I might just start with the main. So I'm going to define main. Typically our main functions, we don't pull any details in immediately. This is the launching point for the rest of our programs. So because I want this to run, I think I'm going to actually move this. So I'm going to do a Control X and a Control V. And I'm going to move that down inside our main. And I think it actually says that somewhere in here. Define blah, 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 blah. So it just makes sure that we're able to access it. So we haven't talked a lot about how functions pass variables back and forth, but one of the great features is, from a security standpoint, is you can't directly see from one function to another variables. So if a variable can be different in different functions. But think about it this way, on like say a college information system. I want to keep my social security number only in the financial aid system. I don't want it in the admissions one or something else. So it's part of the good thing that functions will do. So the very first thing that it says to do, and maybe we kind of look at these in order, is it says list all those things out there. So we want to list what's in there, and so what we could simply do then is we could actually just print that. So we could print, what did it say? So list, colon space, and then we put in our list. Great. Now, this is where we're gonna run this several times just to make sure I haven't done any typing error while I'm typing, which is pretty common. All right, so I'm gonna click run, and look at that. I already did something really weird in 13. So, what did I do? Probably forgot a comma or something. So I'm gonna do this. This is one of them I keep in my, like, I'm gonna always copy and paste those in. So I didn't even look and see. It's in a text document I keep of beginning and ends. So now we'll run it. Yay, works. So I had some weird typo when I was talking to you. Probably forgot a quotation mark or something weird. So what that does is it says, hey, I'm going to run this, and it did print our list, which is kind of what we're looking for here. So our next function, so if we kind of go in order, so it says we need the mode. All right. So let's think about how we can figure out the mode. So first I'm going to just define it. I'm going to say define mode. Now, it doesn't do it automatically. It's not that easy, but we need to think about how it's going to do. So, what we need to do is we need to find unique numbers and find their frequency. So this is where we got to use our thinking cap a little bit. So there's a lot of ways we can do it. What I would like to introduce you to is a brand new type of list item. And we're going to introduce you to the dictionary. So a dictionary entry has a specific quality. So a dictionary is a name and then a statement that's attached with it. So it really is like a dictionary, and we use it for that purpose. So you could have the word help, and it would have a description of what it is. So we can build one. So we're just going to create a blank one. So up above the square brackets are those braces. If we create an element with braces, that calls itself a dictionary, and it's going to have two different pieces to it. All right. So what we're looking for then is some way that we can scroll through that, and what we're going to take is our list here, and we're going to build a dictionary out of it. So in other words, it's going to have dictionary item number 3, and each time we encounter 3, the description of it is going to increase by 1. So it's just an easy way that we can do that. So the other piece we need to think about is, in this function, I can't access this list directly. I can't say, well, in fact, I can show you what will happen. So if I try to print, let's see what happens. So we have to call it. So how do we want to do that? I'm trying to think here how to show you how to test that really quickly. So if I did a mode, let's see. Oh, you know what? I could just do this. So let's do it that way. All right. So we know our list exists, and we know it's going to print this. So let's see what happens. And now it says, oh, wait, list isn't defined. It printed it up here for me, but then when it tried to run this function, it can't see it. And the reason it can't see it is we have to directly pass that into it. So in here in this function, I'm going to pass in that list variable like that. And so now, when this runs, and it calls this function, it's going to get past whatever's in this list function. So what it should do, missing one positional argument. Did something weird. List mode, find unique measures, find positional argument. Oh, I imported into the function, but I didn't actually create an assignment to it. Even though we passed in the values of it, it's not the same thing. So I would have to do, hang on. So sample equals list so that I get that data back out of it. So we'll show you that. So even though it's here, I still can't access it by that name because that name only exists here. And we just pass it in by values. So anyway. All right, let's try to think about how we can do this. So we still need to figure out how we can go through that entire element. All right. So the easiest way I can think of to do that is we have to use some kind of a loop because we're looping through all the elements in there. So I can't use frequency, but I could shorten it to like frequency. So I'm going to call it that, just freak. We know it's going to be frequency. And I'm going to have it assign a value. So I'm going to assign dictionary. Now, we know that we can actually assign two different elements. So we can create an array at any point. And so we're going to take advantage of that. So we're going to also take advantage of a method called get. So, oh, hit the wrong key. That's kind of exciting. All right. So notice that turned orange, so it's a keyword none. What that means is it's kind of a blank value. We could have used 0, but none is also a way we can do it. So when this first runs, it's going to assign that variable frequency, and it's going to pull and get the first number. The first number in there, 3, we know it hasn't occurred. We don't have a list of how many times it's occurred. So this tells me then I can do this. So if frequency is equal to none, so if that's true, then we can change it to dictionary. And the dictionary allows us the advantage to this is I can reference it by its name. So we assigned a value for 3. So I could call it then whatever we pull in there. So this value, I'm pointing at the screen, that doesn't help. So we said its number is what we've pulled out of it. So we could assign it a dictionary value of number. And then we could assign it a set value. So the first time it's going to be 1. we could then say use our else clause because there's only two possibilities. Else, we could then add a value in there. So, we would do something like dictionary number, because I don't like typing that. I'm going to redo it here. So, same value. Make sure that doesn't make us an issue. So it's not 1. We're going to say that it's then whatever that frequency is plus 1. So every time it comes through here, it's going to add it. So the first time 3 comes through, it's going to say, oh, there's nothing there. And because we don't need to go through that again. All right, so the other piece we need in here is we've got to come up with a loop. Okay. So, we have our dictionary, we have our frequency, but here's what we can do. So I like for loops for this just because it makes it easy. And notice down here I use number just as a generic. So for number in list, make sure I have the right one there. All right, for number in list, we're creating a loop that will run through that entire group of list items here. So here's what we got to do though. Let's see if it'll work inside of here. This may be an exercise in frustration. So inside of every other editor, I can highlight and then tab a section in. Oh, look, I did that. All right. I had not ever tried that in our sample here. So now, inside of this loop, we're going to run this through every item in that list. So the first time it's going to get assigned a value of none, and then the second time it's going to keep adding. So if I had 3 in there 3 times, my dictionary item would then list it in there. So that's step 1. So this will assign values to it, so we know how much is in there. So what we could do right now is we could do a print so we could print that dictionary and see what it looks like. It doesn't yet fulfill all of our requirements. Alright, so let me see what kind of crazy things I've got in here that are going to cause it to screw up. Okay, mode. Yeah, okay. So, doesn't like that so far. What have I done? Traceback line 26 in module main. So main calls up main, which then in line 8 has something wrong with it. Okay. Let me look at that for a second. Missing one required positional argument. What is it looking for? Oh, duh. Hey. If I'm going to take a variable in there, I have to tell it that I'm sending a variable. Alright. Alright. So, this is what that output of that dictionary looks like. And so, it says number 3, and there's one of them. 1, there's 2, because we actually have 1, 2. 7, there's 1. 4, there's 1. 10, there's 1. So we can try this and see what happens. So we could put in another 10. And we could make sure that this works. So that dictionary is kind of handy because I can reference it by that number and I can see those then. What I don't have yet, so looking at that, in this case, when I added all those 10s, our mode is going to be 10, obviously. But I don't know that yet, so I have to come up with a way that I can count those. Yeah. So, let's go back down to our mode, and we need to come up with another piece in here. So I'm just going to kind of, remark that out. So what I need is some way to get a maximum value. Alright. So what I'm looking at in that dictionary, I think there might be a way to do that. So, first things first, if there's nothing in that list, we know that it's going to be 0. So we want to look at some of those error conditions we're going to see. So I can't use maximum because it's a keyword, and that's kind of a, so maybe I call it number maximum. So I'm creating a variable that's kind of descriptive. What I can do is there is a function inside of Python called max. Oh, well, that's kind of handy. What I'm going to pass into that function then is my dictionary, but what I want is the second piece, so bear with me. So dictionary.values, so it's going to take that portion of it, and what I'm also going to do then is I'm going to create a loop. Because if you think about it, it's like key and a value, if you want to think about it that way, or a dictionary item and its explanation. So I'm going to create a loop to loop through all of those items in there. So I need to figure out what that key segment is after it's done. Because this is going to give me that maximum value, but it's going to return, so in this case it's going to return 4. Well, 4 doesn't do me a lot of good because I don't know which one that's attached to. So that's why we're looping through here. So for key in dictionary, so we're creating that loop. And then something like if equals number maximum, then this whole function, what it's going to return is that key value that we just identified. All right, so let's take a look at it a little bit. A couple of things we need to probably add, but let's think about what we're doing. So this gets us that frequency. That seemed to work. This, though, says, all right, we can pull through there, and you could actually find, well, here maybe it makes sense to print number maximum. So when we run this, it's going to, what do I call it? I must have done something with a capital D. Where did I do it? Line 22. Oh. All right. So it runs through and it says, here's my list. And it says, hey, you have a value of 4. That value doesn't tell us much, but what it does do is gets us a way to find that most common one. All right. So if we return that key, we're going to pass it back to our main function. And so instead of our mode just saying we're going to run it, let's change that to this. So how about if we print, and let's see, how do we call it? Mode. Now, what we need then is we need that key value that gets returned. And so mode list, do we have enough parentheses? Yes. All right, so now let's try it and see what happens. Oh, I didn't close one somewhere. Oh, right there. All right. So now it prints something. Now, I have something weird in there. Mode. Why does it print a 0 and then a 10? So we may need to figure out... Oh, because I put it in there. What was I doing? I typed something wrong. Alright, try it again. Chunk. There we go. Alright. So mode equals 10. Here's a question, though. So right now, we know that something with 4 items is going to trigger that. So what if I put in there 9 4 times? Oh, and it still says it's 10. Is that technically accurate? So how do we deal with a mode when we have multiple items with the same number? And in the case of this, what it's going to do is the first one it finds. So we might have to think about a way to fix that a little bit. But for now, we're just assume that our list is perfect and that doesn't happen. If I take out one of the 10s, bless you, now it'll identify that as 9. Bless you again. The allergies have already started. So, couple of other problems with this, and we'll show you what happens. So if that list is empty somehow, let's see what happens when we run it. Oh! Because we don't have anything item in there, we need to also correct that error. So what was it? 3 1, 7, 1, 4, 10. All right, so we're going to look at a way to fix that also in here, is how we can find that error. So dictionary values. So we know we're going to run that. So let's at the very top of this. We typically use our if statements, and one way we can do that, so if the length of dictionary is equal to 0, so in other words there's not an element in there, which is what we just experimented with, then we can also just say return you can return a numeric. A better way might be to set it up as a 2-liner, so you would say key equals 0 and then return key. That way it's a little more parallel. And then what we would do is we would then take the next piece of our statement and put that in an else clause. So all of this actually runs inside of that else clause. So now if it's a 0, it's going to come up here and say, oh, okay. What we did not look for is what if we have multiple modes? And we did not look at that yet. So I don't think our program, if you run the testing on it, does not evaluate for that. We can look at it and see. So 1 of 3 tests. Well, we haven't written a median or mean test yet, but we can certainly, it pulls the modes. So it's not as sophisticated as what we would like to think. You solved the problem that way. But kind of thinking about it, how else could we deal with that to find those also? So here we run through them, but as soon as we hit that, we exit out of it. So we might have to think about a way to accommodate multiple modes. Well, let's do probably the easiest one. So mode had we had to think about it a little bit. I want to do the easiest one, give our brain a break. And again, we have to get that information in, so list, it's being passed in. So if that's being passed in, our main then should say mean and we're passing in that value of list to it. Now, we could actually inside of here use a different name. It's just handy for us to use the same name. But really what you're getting passed are that set of values. So, if nothing else happens, we know that our mean, or let's call it average to not confuse ourselves, is going to equal 0 to start with. So that garbage collection, we created a value. And we need to figure out how many items there are in this particular thing. So we have to come up with a way to do that. So that length statement sounds like a really good way to do that, to figure out our length. So we could say numbers is equal to then the length of list. So now we have how many numbers we have. Now we need to figure out a way to add them together. So again, our best way to do it is probably that idea of a loop again. So maybe for num in list. So it's going to scroll all the way through that list. And then we called it, well, our average is our final number. Why don't we call this one sum? For sum equals sum plus that num we pulled in there. Sum equals sum plus num. All right. Confusing, but it lets us pull those values in there. So now we maybe want to print these out, and just to make sure that we haven't done anything horrible, so we're going to print, let's see, so let's print our average, which we haven't created yet. Let's print our numbers, so how many numbers we have, and our sum, and see if that works. All right. What did I do there? I may not be able to use sum in there. We'll make it easy. We'll just call it S. And we know that S stands for sum. Just notice how it colored it a weird thing, so it's looking for something else in there. Line 30. It's average equals 0. Why does it not like that? List. Did I pass it in there in the main? Go back up to the main. What have I done weird? Line 30 definition. I did some silly typo, probably a comma or something weird missing. List, so that should run our function. So it goes up to line 30, which is where we begin our function. Define mean of list. What have I done? Oh, hey, you know what? It actually told me what I was missing there. All right, now we'll try it again. All right, so it does print out our list. It does give us our modality, so we know that there's two values of 1, and you could print that different. All right, so here's where we get those numbers. So our average number of numbers and what they add up to. So I just want to check and make sure that's right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That looks like the right number of numbers. We also then have to add them up, and yeah, that looks fine. Okay. All right. So now I don't need that print statement anymore. That's just in the way. So we've come up with a set of values. So we could actually come up with, so I'm at the right line. So S, so we could say average then equals, so our sum, or S, divided by how many numbers we have, which we know was num numbers. All right, so now if I run it, so mode mean, whoa, why did I get that? Oh, because I didn't do this. So there was no value in there. So now when I run it, the mean is 4.333. Huh. All right. I have one problem with this one again that I can think of right off the top of my head. There's probably others. We could format that number to a couple of decimals, but what happens? What happens here? I don't have any values in there, and I run it. Dope. Division by 0. All right, so I'm going to put those numbers back. So I have to be careful of that. And so anytime we're dividing, I'm always paranoid about dividing by 0 because we don't know how to handle that. So what I can do then is I could actually create an if statement in there again. So we got the number of numbers, right? So I could put in something like this. So if num numbers is equal to 0, then we automatically just return, what would we return? Something that says we have 0, yeah, because it's going to be a 0 value. And then we could put this statement, else, and then we put these, and we tab them out. So that would run in the other case. In any other case, this is going to run. So now if I run it, no matter if I have a 0 in there, it's going to give me that. So I'm starting to add some extra junk in there, so I'm going to get rid of that really quickly. So I do need that one, print list. All right, so mode list. Got some extra print statements in here we need to deal with. All right. So that one I don't need, just so it doesn't cause us issues and hiccups later on. And we could format that so it formats to however many digits you want. Not necessarily critical in here, but let's see what happens when we run the checks. Oh, all right, we're moving on up. We got 2 of them out of 3. All right, so now we need to define how we create a median. So the median might be the hardest one of all because we have to resort this before we do it. So define median, make sure I put in my colon. All right. Creates list of numbers in order, selects middle. Alright, so that doesn't sound that hard. We're going to create a list, and So number list is we're gonna create it as a list item. So we use the square brackets. And what we're gonna do is take all the numbers that are up here in this list and we're gonna shove them into this file here. And the reason we're gonna do that is so we can manipulate it and create it as we go. So for number in list, and again I'm just using number here, even though I can't spell it, as just a placeholder for a temporary piece. I'm then going to say number list dot append and return that number in there. So as it scrolls through this list, it's going to append them to this new list and put them in there. So that way I'm not messing up my original list and I'm copying all the contents of it from one to the other. Alright. Well, now the hard part is I got to figure out a way to sort that list. So in every other computer programming course we talk about all these different sort orders. I'm going to do something here that just makes me happy. Look, I have a method for it called sort. And it's going to take that entire number list and sort it for me. So I could print number list at that point, and you'd see that we've now sorted them in order. That saves a lot of time and a lot of steps. So where's my main function? So let's call that to start with. So median, sorry. And let's see if that actually works. Or more likely, we'll see what idiotic typing mistakes I made. Oh, look at that. 1, 1, 3, 4, 7, 10. Well, that's pretty slick. I don't have to go to all this huge amount of trouble. So now I can figure out where those are going to be at. And because I've now put them in this list, if I can figure out a position, I can pop that out. Alright, so I don't need this print statement because it's kind of in my way, but we're getting closer. So we have our list. We may need a couple of other pieces in there. So I need that value in the middle. So I'm just going to call it middle. I'm going to say that's equal to the length of my number list. So in other words, in this case, it should show me 6. And I'm going to use a special math function, so I'm going to use 2 division symbols, and I'm going to return the integer of that only, because I don't care about the decimal fraction piece or anything else. And I'm going to divide it by 2. So 6 divided by 2, I should get 3. 7 divided by 2, I'll still get. So in other words, I'm cheating a little bit because I'm putting that place there. All right. So now I could output where that position is. So now I know that it's in order, so I could just say return, and return, what did I call it, number list. So let's see what happens. So let me build my main up here. So same thing, I'm going to print median. Alright, so this, I need one more. So this should run and print the median and the median of list. Alright, so let's see what happens. Well, A, I can't spell median, I can see that. So, is that right? So I'm going to look at my list sorted. Huh. How do I need to figure a median if I have an even number of items in a list? Does anybody remember? No, we take the two middle numbers and we take the average of those two. Oh, great. Alright, so maybe we need to come up with something else. So, we also might want to worry about what happens if we have an empty list. So, I'm going to go back down to my mode and I'm going to, in an ideal world, this works great. We see all those pieces, great. But now we need to account for a couple of other items that might happen. So we can sort our list. We're still perfect there. I'm just going to take out this, and I'm going to put in an if statement. So if the length of number list is equal to 0, I'm going to return 0. Zeros are a problematic issue in here. Right, make sure my things are lined up there. So that lets me construct the second half of this. So I could do my else. Alright, so now we're at this one, and I'm going to do this. Alright, so this we're still, come back here. This is still valid. We're going to try to find the middle, but I need a little bit more clarification on that. And so what I might look for is to tell if that number did it have any remainders? Alright, so how might I think about, how did I determine if that was actually divisible by 2 or not? So there's a lot of ways we could think about it, but what I want to figure out is some way that I could say, well, if it's divisible by 2, then what happens? So one way we might be able to do it is this. And there are a lot of other ways to do it. So if length of number divided by 2 is greater than, and I'm just going to copy this real quick, save my typing fingers. So, and I would probably put this all in parentheses just so I can see what I'm doing. So, what I've built here is says, so if length of number divided by 2 is greater than the length of number list is greater than the divided by 2. So in other words, if I divide 7 by 2, I get 3.5. But if I peel it off where I don't have a decimal fraction, I have 3. So that should, whatever happens there, should be positive and tell me that it's not an even number. Does that make sense? The other way you could do it is, if those are equal, then we're going to perform some action. And maybe that makes more sense. Now, there's a whole lot of other ways you could do it. You could also use the modulus function to see if there's any remainder on there. So if length of numbers divided by 2 is, so there's a lot of different ways you could do it. Somehow we have to determine if that number is even or odd. So so now I've created it where the length divided by 2 and the length divided by 2, but giving us only the integer. If those are equal, then we're going to assume that it is is an even number, and we just can return that list in the middle. Our else statement then would be we have to get the two middle numbers and average them together somehow. Oh, I went way past time here. Sorry I didn't even look up there. All right, so if I'm going to average them, let me give you a real short piece here. So I'm just going to put in here return. And so instead of returning just that number list in the middle, I'm going to have to do something like this. Number list middle, because that is still a useful function for us, plus number list middle plus 1, because we're going to go to the next one, so we'd get the two middle, and all of that giant mess divided by 2. Does that make sense? So that's the way that one way we could look at it. So we could run that now, and so our median should be different than what we had before. Oh, I don't have enough parentheses somewhere here. I need one more at the end of it, I think. Maybe? Somewhere I've got an unmatched set that's in there. So I was just trying to show you really quickly here. All divided by 2. So what you're looking for is you've got the two middle numbers and you're dividing those two by 2. And so I've tried to put that in. So somewhere I'm missing a parenthesis somewhere in this whole mess. But that's one way to do it. And so we'll take a look at that and make sure that it will function. It's going to say unmatched. I have a right arrow that isn't matched in line 54. Okay. Now I've got to, so somewhere in there I have got, and it may even be the line above, that there's things that aren't matching. So I'll have to look at that really quickly. But that way, no matter which way we do it, we get the correct value. So if that's not even, we come down here and we add them together. Otherwise, if it is even, we get it this way. So does that make sense? And there are other ways you could do it. You could do the modulus. You could create a function within there to determine if it's even or odd. So a lot of different ways you could create that for 5-1.